Jacksonville, a child was born who couldn't sit still. 86 years later with no regret. You know that man can't sit still yet. The Great Depression couldn't get him down. He worked for his dad's store in town, collecting money in small amounts. The poor whites and blacks in their furniture accounts. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. As he'd collect, he'd talk to folks. He'd hear legends, tales, songs, and jokes. Now this fine treasure he'd record and write. He was colorblind, didn't see black and white. Writer's project for the WPA. Zora Neale Hurston, he earned his pay. Crackers and blacks, they talk for hours. It was a barefoot history of this land of flowers.
The Weekman was on the 12th of May 2018 from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. This was a very interesting week. Of course, we say that every week, but this week was in that the conflict in the Mideast has expanded. In the Golan Heights area there, missiles were fired from the Syrian territory into the Zionist or Jewish state or whatever you want to call it, and they responded with some air attacks. Well, it didn't really resonate very much in the U.S., as many foreign policy matters do not. And at the same time, on, I believe, the 12th of June, a summit is set in Singapore between the U.S. President D.J. Trump and Field Marshal Eun, the leader of the Democratic Republic of North Korea. And that will be a monumental meeting there. We don't know what results will come from it, but some have already resignated. The release of some prisoners that were held in the Democratic Republic, which were useless to them. Therefore, they sent them straight ahead to Washington, D.C. And D.J. Trump was there to receive them, and they had the flag waving ceremony, which disappeared from the air like home fries on Boston Street. Anyway, nonetheless, that was sort of that cap of a foreign relations, but it was beyond that in Germany, which has an interest in Iran and the canceling of the nuclear agreement. We didn't bring that in, but that was the basic piece there, and it affects the Europeans much more so than the Americans. Siemens and various other German industrial giants have an interest, over 3 billion euros in Iran, and American companies to a lesser extent. What this change would be, and the so-called sanctions, it would have problems for U.S. companies doing business there. And now, to what extent would this extend to Siemens and various other companies? And this is one of the problems with Wilsonian foreign policy, or racist foreign policy, that is now aimed at Iran. It is, in fact, out of date. One of the things the Iranians have done is they have moved from a dollar-based metric as far as their petrol or oil revenues. In other words, how they receive the money to euros. So what happens there is that with euros, it doesn't go into the American banking system. And you will see more of this. So the Russian Federation has moved in that direction to different currencies. So we now see these other currencies beginning to play a much bigger role in transactions as the international community moves away. I have a Reuters story of a German Bitkom operation that they're using a Bitkom in Germany. Let me just get the specifics of that, and we'll get back here. Now, this is a German online bank uses Bitkom to transfer loans. Now, this is a little different. Bitkom uses, of course, cryptocurrencies, or Bitbon, I'm sorry about that, to bypass the Swiss international transfer system to lend money across the globe rapidly and at low cost. And now this is one of the new features. You've seen various online operations in the U.S. where you can apply for a loan and the results come in about 3 minutes. Well, using this type of technology, the bank or whatever it's called, Bitbon has now moved from these traditional money transfers that are relatively costly due to, of course, currency transfer fees that take up to a few days there. And now in Berlin's fashionable district there, the Bitbon payments work independent of where the customer is via the internet. It is very, very quick, and fees are low. Now, these are relatively low loans considering what loans are. Bitkom has been used as a collateral for loans, but is never in a way of transferring credit in currency internationally. Ortbach's service, and this is has been growing popular amongst clients since he launched the company in 2013. So he's been around for 5 years. They have 24 workers, and they're in 12 different countries, who manage loans for 100 clients, amounting to a relatively small amount, $1 million each month. Many of the clients are small businesses, freelance workers. Orbach says loans are relatively small and don't exceed the mark of $50,000 in 2016. Bitbon was officially licensed as a bank and has gained many investors since that. So in other words, it is taking off. The news out of Omaha, Nebraska last week, we had the Woodstock of capitalist there on the Oracle of Omaha's Warren Buffett, I should say, shop. But things are moving. Bitkom is still there. I'm not sure where Bitkom is today in terms of its value. It's in the thousands of dollars. I think it was up as high as $10,000. And the adoption of Bitkom has been rapid, of course, in Germany. And it trails only the U.S., that's according to Knowles, which tracks a new company has arrived there. Nodes, tracks the location of all Bitkom nodes that transmit data on a new transaction. So, in other words, we have a new industry that has arrived there. And let me just a little news out of Washington. John McCain, of course, ailing out in Sedona, Arizona, recovering from treatment from aggressive and typically fatal type of brain cancer. But nonetheless, he's been issuing statements, and he is also on Twitter, and he's denounced the Glenner Haspel, I suppose is her name, someone has been around the CIA for 30 years and connected with torture. And of course, Senator McCain himself speaks from experience. He was held in Vietnam for 5.5 years, often deprived of sleep, food, and medical care after his jet was shot down over Hanoi. He's not expected to cast a vote, but by not being there, he's a no vote automatically based on her record overseeing controversial interrogations of suspects. And the Washington Post has also editorialized against her. She's within 1 or 2 votes of being confirmed, but a disgrace to that operation is always disgrace, period. Lindsey Graham, one of McCain's closest friends, returned this week from an extended visit and described his outlook as one foot in front of the other. And we talked about the future. We talked about what's going on in the Mideast. But there's little expectation that Senator McCain will appear himself. He's 81 years old there. Now, I should say, before I leave, I'd like to see our politics begin to return to the purpose and practices that distinguish our history from the history of other nations, he writes. Now, it's Relentless Wave. That is a volume, a memoir released set for release actually later this month. Be one of those bestsellers out there. He has questioned the Trump administration from the very start. The illness of Senator McCain, this is from the Washington Post, adds gravity to his opposition to Haspel, a senior CIA official during a post-9/11 oversaw terrorism, waterboarding, etc. During the confirmation on Wednesday, she pledged that she would never allow the CIA to engage in those types of interrogation methods, and said it immoral. She lied. The same day, former Vice President Cheney, don't hear very much a leading opponent of waterboarding, told Fox Business Network that the CIA actions did not amount to torture. I don't know where he's been. Water on the brain. Anyway, I believe Jenna Haspel is a patriot and loves our country, devoted her professional life to service and defense. He says that Senator McCain, speaking of his Hasfeld's role in overseeing the use of torture by Americans, is disturbing, and her refusal to acknowledge torture is immorality is disqualifying. And she, like old Vice President Cheney, is in the same situation. The White House did not speak to the reports. I'm not going to comment. And this is the Washington Post and other news media reported that Kelly Sadler, this is a character that said it doesn't matter, he's dying anyway. This is really an inappropriate situation. Separately, retired General Thomas McEntry said in an interview on Fox Business Network that torture worked on John McCain, so John McCain's years in captivity. That's why they call him Songbird John. I mean, again, this is very sad, very disrespectful of who would normally be a hero in the context of American military matters, and has been one for a very long time. Nar Sadler, Nar McEntry have publicly apologized. Independent accounts of his time in captivity did not include any suggestions that he offered material information to the captors. But you have to understand that servicemen like John McCain are now taught that not to endure the torture. They have limited information, therefore they can offer their limited information. He did, by multiple accounts, refuse offers of early release based on his status as son of a Navy admiral, and he was that. A lot of admirals in his family. His defense fell to his family and some old friends in Washington. His wife, Cindy, rebuffed Sadler, and of course his daughter, Megan, who is on The View. They were not very happy with these characters. Well, this is the sort of thing that would come out of this type of administration. He is a genuine hero in the sense of American values. When you take into account where the Vietnam War was in American history at one time. Not only that, this newfound so-called patriotism and glorification of militarism. If you take all of that into account, no doubt John McCain is an all-American hero. And this is where it's very, very troubling. You're getting this alternative fake news out here to destroy the reputation. Remember the swift boat operators? That was a commercial by the Republican Party to defeat brother John Kerry, who was a military hero. He had his medals, and this is by people like Cheney and DJ Trump that were never in the military in the first place. And now these characters like Cheney sitting around. In fact, they asked Cheney why he was not in the military. He claimed he had better things to do. And this, so in other words, what happens is your whole militarism program turns into a fake news opportunity, and that's all it is. And this eventually catches up. Now, on the other side, many of the American people really don't pay very close attention to this, and also because of how it is presented to people in less than a minute, most of these people don't have the attention span to deal with that sort of situation. Some character sent a YouTube video praising the I won't call it a drug, but it is a cleaning solution primarily uses now, called turpentine. Now, turpentine was used as a home remedy type of thing 50, 60, and more years ago, and been used historically. And I can recall when we could buy it at markets and at drugstores or chemists. Those listen to this report, and it did work. We actually used it in a severe case of flu 50 years ago. But this character was talking about spirits of turpentine, it's called, purchased from a hardware store. It's used to clean your paint brushes. If you use oil-based paint, you don't see much of that anymore, but that's basically what it's used as, a cleaning solution, period. And it has warnings on it, but it could cause cancer and various other things. And this quack, I won't mention the name, but was saying, well, she didn't know anything about it. She was experimenting with it and putting it on sugar cubes. That's not the way it's done. It's done with an American measurement called a teaspoon with granulated sugar. I believe it was a drop. Now, 50 years ago, I don't remember exactly, but that is basically it. It was taken, and it did work, but it was a different type of solution. Now, that is also happened with some of these quacks that promote, let's see, what do they call it? A form of peroxide. But the problem is, with that form of peroxide, you have peroxide. Peroxide is very good for washing of wounds and infections, that sort of thing. That's what's taken internally. But they then have a different type of peroxide that they say, well, you can take this internally. You can't. Many of these people end up at the at poison centers and in medical centers. The reason I use this analogy here was how people get their news, even when they get so-called legitimate news, is sent at them very, very quickly. So they have to absorb this within usually less than a minute, and also many times also because of the attention span of people. I'm talking about older people my age. that the way they're acquainted with it. Many of these people do not read the Washington Post or read the blogs that have more to say about these issues. They just see it there and really don't quite understand what's going on. Enough of this one. We'll move very, very quickly from this story here. And the German online bank. We've already bring that up. There's an interesting Jim Palmer story. We'll get that on the Monday morning quarterback. But let's go to Louisiana. A pipeline protection bill, part of a wider protest crackdown. Now this has happened. This is from our friends at Facing South by Susan Sturgis. 31 states have considered, and there's 63 bills. And 7 have enacted those, and 30 are pending, and 26 have defeated them. This week, the Louisiana legislature advanced a bill that stipends penalties for damaging gas oil pipelines, creating new crimes related to conspiracy to trespass on so-called pipeline property. The measure resembles model legislation. Again, this is cookie cutter, like they literally were selling these news formats at one time to stations. I don't know if they're doing that. For the American Legislative Exchange, that's Alex, a Virginia operation there, set out by the Koch brothers. The model bills began circulating in 2010 against the Dakota Access Pipeline, which passed near Aboriginal American Indian lands while carrying shale oil from North Dakota to Illinois. The pipeline is part of a larger network owned by Dallas-based Energy Transfer Partners, which includes the Bayou Bridge project now being built across southern Louisiana. That's Lake Charles to St. James, ending about 50 miles upstream of New Orleans along the Mississippi River. Ongoing protests against Bayou Bridge, with opposition citing concerns, of course, about wetlands erosion, disruption of crawfish industry, a seizure of private lands through eminent domain, and the threat of spills to the Bayou Lafourche, which supplies drinking water to 300,000 Louisianans, including the Homa Nation. Last year, the pipeline opponents set up Water is Life, a protest camp. Just last month, they blocked one of the pipeline's supplier facilities in an attempt to disrupt construction while legal challenges go on. The group opposing the Bayou Bridge pipeline, amongst them the Bow, Louisiana Bucket Brigade, have not engaged in property damage, but in March, workers found equipment being used to build a pipeline vandalized, with hydraulic hoses, electrical lines cut, etc. The company blamed the environmentalists. They had no proof of that. And just days later, major, I guess this is Hobart, a Democrat from Point Copi Parish, introduced a bill modeled after Alex, would set up to 15 years in prison with a $10,000 fine, or up to 20 years and a $25,000 fine if the damage threatened human life, disruption of a site. The argument, the measure needed to protect communities living near the pipeline. Louisiana bill even goes further than the Alex model, creating a new crime of conspiracy to engage in unauthorized. Several states have done that. Entry or a critical infrastructure facility, establish penalties up to a year in prison for conspiracy to commit trespass on pipeline property, up to 12 years and $250,000 fine if the conspiracy threatens human life. Attorney Pamela Spears of the Center for Constitutional Rights, which is representing the Bayou Bridge opponents, have called the measure Alex Plus, no doubt about that. And to go on here, the legislature overwhelmingly passed the Louisiana House last month and the Senate this week. It goes back to the House for final approval with a concurrent vote set for the 15th. That'll be next week. And then it heads to John Bell Edwards for his signature. The oil and gas industry, a major problem in Louisiana. You can bet that'll be passed, criminalizing political protests. Besides Louisiana, several states have considered legislation to amp up penalties against protesters. Such as measures have failed in Colorado, Georgia, I'm surprised about that, and Wyoming, and are pending in Minnesota, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. One passed in Oklahoma, spurring the American Civil Liberties Union to raise concern about the criminalization of political protests. So in other words, we're back to the days of Dr. King and these injunctions and other sorts of things. 3 states in the South, besides Louisiana, have enacted laws relating to protests. In Florida, Scott issued an executive order last October declaring a state of emergency before a speech at the University of Florida in Gainesville by white supremacist leader Richard Spencer. Among other things, the order activated the Florida National Guard, allowed for closure of affected government buildings and facilities. Now, this is one of the things that was encouraged by these so-called white supremacists. They would appear on a campus and sometimes not appear, and they would incite protests against them. And then the Rick Scotts of the world could do that. In the state of Tennessee, the legislature passed a bill, and Governor Haslam signed into law last April that created new penalties for protesters who blocked traffic, while unlawful obstruction of a street or highway was already a Class C misdemeanor subject to 30 days in jail. The new law added a $200 fine. In Virginia, McAuliffe last year issued 2 executive orders related to protests, one temporary banning protests near Confederate General Lee's Memorial in Richmond, another one declaring a state of emergency ahead of August white supremacy gathering in Charlottesville, Virginia, and in which a counter-protester, Heather Hyde, was killed and others were injured, being hit by a car driven by a white supremacist. So it didn't work at all. Protest-related legislation is pending in several other southern states. In Alabama, would make it a felony to do something illegal to prevent or attempt to prevent a public speaking event, as well as a measures in Kentucky and in North Carolina that would eliminate liability for a driver who hit a protester who blocked traffic. Now, this is insane. In other words, it will allow a driver to deliberately hit someone like Heather Hyde and not be held responsible for it. And at the federal level, DJ Trump issued an executive order last year reinstating a program that sends surplus military equipment to police nationwide. It had been scaled back under President Barack Obama. And this is on the Beauregard sessions, he described the equipment as life-saving. Now, this is Susan Sturgis here, and facing south. We'll make sure we put this up here. Let's go to the Seattle article, and then we'll come back to Uncle Carl Rove here. Somewhere we had the Seattle article here. See where we put it. No, it's not here. Anyway, hopefully we'll let's do Uncle Carl while we're here. Uncle Carl was writing in the Wall Street Journal, as he usually does, "Don't write off the Republicans yet. Every successive test of state primaries reveals more of how the midterm elections might play out this fall. The Texas primary in March punctured the hype that high Democratic turnouts during early voting in the Lone Star State's urban counties meant more Democrats and Republicans would vote in primaries. In fact, more Republicans than Democrats cast a vote." Well, that is concluded there because there were more Republicans to vote. So, where are the lessons from Tuesday's races in Indiana, North Carolina, Ohio, and West Virginia? First, Indiana and West Virginia represent real Republican pickup opportunities in a contest for the Senate. Now, the Hoosier Republicans, Mike Brim, who thought he served in the state legislature, plausibly campaigned as an outsider in a state, talking about Indiana here, that DJ Trump carried by 19 points, and Barack Obama won in 2008. Republicans are united. Mr. Brim, who spent millions on his primary campaign, appear prepared to spend more. I don't doubt that. He's a multi-millionaire. And in West Virginia, they got Patrick Morrisey. He's the Attorney General there. And there's Don Blankenship. He's of federal prison, China people anyway, cocaine Mitch. Fame was supposedly surging in a recent Fox News debate, but finished a distant third. West Virginia, well, it doesn't really matter there. That's a state that DJ Trump won by 42 points, and at one time was carried by our own Senator Dukakis. Anyway, meanwhile, Democratic incumbent Joe Meacham showed signs of weakness. His relatively unknown primary opponent, Paula Jean Swaggen, won 30.2% of the vote, despite spending, she did spend $130,000 to Meacham's 1.3. Also worse than for him is the 138,200 Republicans voted in the primary, the most ever for a Republican midterm. But these are always low turnouts. In Ohio, the turnout was so low there after delivering Trump's wider than expected margin. Ohio appears to be still leaning red in the midterm approaches. There were 827,000 votes cast in the GOP primary, compared with 679,000 for the Democratic primary. About a 20% turnout there, as Ms. Turner said. She's ahead of the Bernie Sanders organization, Our Revolution. It was dismal. It's clear both parties remain vulnerable to disruption. The GOP by candidates claiming to be more Trump-like, and Democratic candidates claiming to be further left. Well, not exactly there, but Richard Cadre won the primary there over Dennis Kucinich, and groups associated with Bernie Sanders there, despite his association with Elizabeth Warren and service as head of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Cadre wasn't liberal enough for some elements of the party. No doubt about that. And he'll face a character who's been around forever, Mike DeWine. He's a former senator who ousted Cadre as the Attorney General. That was in 2010. Tuesday was also a bad night for Congressmen looking for a promotion. Everett Jenkins came in second. That was in West Virginia. And Todd Ranker and Louis Measure came in second and third, respectively, in the Indiana Senate contest. Well, it's sort of up and down there, but a lot of money being spent. And in Ohio, the Democratic Party there is having a rough time. Here's the other part of the story. This is by one of our favorite columnists, out of Seattle, Joel Conley. Greenpeace aims to grow pipeline battle. Northwest versus Big Oil. A picture here, the kayaks visits of a 2015 protest against Shell's Arctic drilling. It will take to the water again. That'll be on Sunday the 20th. This time the protest is $7.4 billion Canadian pipeline expansion that will send 890 barrels of oil our way each day. Greenpeace, of course, is involved there. The Northwest versus Kinder Morgan, the fight for oil versus the sea. Sunfish. Anyway, let's see. Sailfish Sea is not oil free. Walk down the beaches behind Limmy Island Congregational Church, and you can watch the oil tankers with these tug escorts from Cherry Point, that is north of Bellingham, Washington. I used to live in Seattle. Anyway, nonetheless, Kinder Morgan is a Houston-based planned by Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion planned by Kinder Morgan. Anyway, the expanded pipeline would carry crude from Alberta's oil sand down to the oil port at Barnaby, just east of Vancouver. And the oil will then be shipped out with 34 tankers each morning, traveling to some of North America's most sensitive maritime waters. The Northwest political leaders are against it. Governor Inslee worries about aquifer whales, and in British Columbia, the Prime Minister there, John Hogan, has vowed his government will use every tool to stop the pipeline. So it's a multi-nation situation here. A member of the Canadian House of Commons who was arrested in a protest there, MP Kennedy Stewart, is running for mayor to succeed Robinson. His warship declared not to. Warship decided not to see another term. Anyway, the Canadian government is determined that the pipeline will be built, according to the Natural Resource Minister Carr. So this is where it's coming to. The tankers will proceed through Haro Strait, which separates our San Juan Island from British Columbia's Gulf Island, and the Straits of San Juan de Fusco, and down the coast and across the Pacific. 230 gallons spilled from a barge. That was in 1988. So anyway, the protest goes on. And according to Mayor Robinson, warned this week, I don't think the resistance on the West Coast is going to fade. It's going to intensify and escalate likely. Anyway, this is from the Seattle PI here, and Glenn Conley. And I don't know why we lost Glenn Conley here, but anyway, strange things do happen here. We'll do the sports now. I guess we won't. Yeah, Conley reappeared. Anyway, we found this to relate there, and from news, we try to get a little news out of Seattle every week at least. I thought there was something else we saw here. Anyway, I guess we'll have to do it later. And we will do it later. Let's do the sports. Not a lot of sports. The NBA game is basically Sunday night. Tiger is making his move at the Players Championship here. He shot one under and he made the cut at the Players. He's won the Players before. And we have, one hockey game went on here. The Eastern Champion Conference Finals. The Capitals 4-2 over the Predators of, where are the Predators from? Oh, he's in Nashville, aren't they? There's so many hockey teams here, hard to think who is whom. I think it is the Predators. Anyway, the Caps won the game, and the Sunday night game, of course, the Cavaliers will be in Boston. That is 8:30 Eastern Time, playing the Celtics. Let's see. This is, what? The series goes on here. I believe this is, Game 7? Yeah. Anyway, we'll see what Mr. LeBron James has to say here. On to Major League Baseball, where the action was. The White Sox were at the Cubs across town on the north side of Chicago. The score was 11-2. The line score: White Sox 5 hits and 2 errors, and the Cubs 15 hits and no errors. Chatwood was a winner. The Rays and Orioles in Camden Yard. The Orioles are starting to win some games. 9-4 was the score. 9 for the Orioles and 4 for the Rays. The Athletics of Oakland were in New York. Athletics 10-5. The line score there. The Athletics had 14 hits, 1 error, and the Yankees 7 hits and no errors. The Mets and Phillies in Philadelphia. Mets 3-1. The Giants and Pirates in Pittsburgh. Pirates 11-2 over the Giants. And in 12, the Red Sox in Toronto. Blue Jays 5-1 there. Atlanta and the Marlins in Florida. Marlins 6-3. The Royals and in Cleveland. High scoring game there. The Royals 10-9. Line score there. The Royals had 15 hits, no errors, and Cleveland 8 hits and 2 errors. You usually don't win games like that. The Rangers and Astros in Houston. The Rangers won that game 1-0. And in 10, the Brewers and Rockies out in Denver. The Brewers won that game 11-10. The Nationals and D-backs in Arizona. Nationals 3-1. Nationals are starting back. Mr. Doolittle got to say. We remember him. The Twins and Angels in California. The Twins 5-4. The Reds and Dodgers in Los Angeles. The Reds 6-2. And the Cardinals and Padres. It was all Cardinals here. 9-5 was the score. Cardinals over the Padres. The line score there. 11 hits for the Cards and no errors. And for the Padres, 11 hits. 13 hits and no errors, and 11 hits and 1 error for the Padres. Mariners and Tigers in the Motor City. Postponed, no doubt, rain. I don't know, that does it for sports. We'll see you on the Monday Morning Quarterback. On Monday morning, we also have a numbers man. That is our macroeconomic program. This weekend, we normally always have it the weekend, This Week in Economics. We'll be talking about the present state of economics, how the recent rise in oil prices at the pump, petrol, if you want to call it that, it is going up because of geopolitical concerns and machinations in the Mideast. We noticed at the observance of the Soviet Union's victory over the Nazis 73 years ago, Bibi Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, was there with V.I. Putin. And kind of interesting there. Putin is in the business of selling oil. We did a program on oil and war, and invite you to tune into that one to understand what the Mideast conflict's all about. effectively. It's this: you have a conflict, it's a geopolitical problem, and with Iran, the sanctions, etc., you get a rise in the cost of petroleum product, and that has happened, and we'll have to see where that goes. The idea is to get to $100 and north of $100 per barrel, and they're on their way. I think it's 77. Anyway, we'll have this on numbers, man. We'll talk about how that will affect, if it does get to 100, the consumer, which is 70% of the American economy. And it'll be a boost to people like the Russian Federation, the Saudis, anyone that's selling oil, including the people in North Carolina, North Dakota, and in Alberta, Canada. Their prospects will be better as long as the pricing is up until they reach whatever, and demand starts to, as they say, level off. So we'll talk about that. We'll have also an open source report. We'll look at open source technology. We'll look at the Google Developers Conference, which was this week there, and some of the latest from it, with some of the latest also from the open source community, and we'll look at security. Have a good weekend, everyone. We'll talk to you on the on this network, the Boston Red Network, and WBRN Radio on Monday morning, and other programming will come.